Hello, welcome to another lesson. We're done with checkmate in ones and checkmate in twos, and now we're going to dive into another different world of checkmate. We're going to be looking at different checkmate patterns that you need to know when you are trying to learn how to play chess, right? And the first one we're going to start with is what we call the Anastasia's checkmate. Yes, you heard me right. That is the name of somebody. So we're going to be looking at the Anastasia's checkmate and the Arabian checkmate in this lesson. The Anastasia's checkmate and the Arabian checkmate have something similar. The knight is always involved. Now, what is the essence of learning all of these checkmate patterns to start with before I even explain what it means? Learning these checkmate patterns is very important because it helps you to understand the right amount of pieces or the right kind of pieces that is necessary for an attack that is eventually going to lead into a checkmate. So if you have a queen that is attacking your opponent's king, you're not just going to be trying to look for all the possible checks that you can with the queen, because you already know that you can't do a checkmate with the queen alone when you're doing an attack. So you're going to be looking to bring other pieces in, and the kind of piece that you're going to bring in determines the kind of checkmate patterns that you're going to be needing to put in place, right? So we're going to start with Anastasia's checkmate, and this checkmate has to do with either the knight and the rook or the knight and the queen. Yes, either the knight and the rook or the knight and the queen. In this position right here, you're seeing that there's a knight, there's a rook, and there's a queen. Now, the first thing that you want to make sure you always see is that the knight is serving as a building block. Is building block the right word? Yeah, the knight is serving as a wall alongside the king's opponent's pawn. It can be a pawn. Mostly, it's a pawn actually, right? So the pawn is serving. The king cannot move diagonally because there's a pawn over here, and right now this knight is responsible for stopping the king from moving either into this square or eventually into this square. Now, one of the first things that you want to do, remember, when we're looking at the checkmate in two, we said the first thing that you want to look for, or always, is looking for all the possible checks. In this position, the first possible, there are a lot of checks that can happen. Actually, not a lot of checks, just two checks. And the first check that will definitely come to your mind, maybe, is queen check, right? And the second check is knight check. But here's the thing, this is the dream square of the knight in the Anastasia's mate. This is the dream square of the knight in the Anastasia's mate. Now, let me just show you something. Let me just set up the board, clear the board, and I'm going to now show you something. Now, when you're doing the checkmate, the Anastasia's checkmate, you want to make sure that, yeah, let's place a king over here, and let's place a rook. Now, when you're doing the Anastasia's checkmate, this is the dream position you want to end up in. Now, there are no pieces on the board, but this is an example of what you're going to end up with eventually if you solve the puzzle. The knight is always going to be 2 steps away from the king on the straight line, right? The knight is always going to be 2 steps away from the king on the straight line, and the reason the knight is over here is because it's stopping the king from going to g1, and it's also stopping the king from going to g3. If the king cannot go to g1 and g3, and also cannot go to g2, now all the squares are completely locked. All we need to do is to look for a check, and if this file also is being under attack, it's going to be a checkmate because the king cannot still move on this same file. The king cannot still move on this same file. Now, let's assume this rook was over here and it was a checkmate in one. Yeah, already you're going to know what the checkmate is going to be. Okay, now let me take this rook off the board and make it a little bit difficult. I'm going to place a queen over here, and we need to find the checkmate in one. Yes, I'm sure you've found it. If you've not found it, make sure you pause and try to find it. Okay, now in this position, same thing, you're looking for all the possible checks. You don't want to move the knight. The knight is right where it's supposed to be. Even moving the knight is not going to result in any possible checks. So moving the knight is just going to be done. Now, you're going to look for all the possible checks that the queen can do. The queen can do this check, but we're trying to control this file now. Since we know that the king cannot move either of these squares, right? Since we know that the king cannot move either of these squares, all we're trying to do is to look for a check that controls this whole file. And you're going to see that moving the queen all the way to h7 is going to do a checkmate on the king, and this is what we call the Anastasia's checkmate. Understood, right? Okay, now, a lot of times you're going to get a position whereby there's a pawn, and maybe sometimes there are like 2 rooks over here and here, 1 over here. Yes, in this position, what do you think is going to be the best thing to do? The best thing to do is actually very simple. What you just need to do is to try and you need to get this pawn away from here. You know that if this pawn disappears, this is going to be a checkmate. So in this point, you're going to have to sacrifice a rook, all because you want to get rid of the pawn. And now you can see we've ended up in the same position we had before, with the pawns beside the king and the knight controlling the g1 and g3 square so that the king cannot move out. And then lastly, all you need is to take control of this open file, and then you just place the other rook in. Right. Sometimes it might be the queen. Let's say we have something like this. Let's say we have something like this. This is also a checkmate into. Just forget that you can go here and it's all a checkmate. So let's say there's a rook here to stop that from happening. Right. Now, if the queen goes here, it's not going to be a checkmate. So yes, in this position, if you want to do the Anastasia checkmate, you need to sacrifice a piece. And the reason is because you really want to get rid of this pawn so that you can do a check on the H file. And in this position, you're going to see that the queen is looking at this pawn, and all we just need to do is to just grab the pawn. And once we've grabbed the pawn, the king takes, and all we need to do is just bam, slam the rook on H8, and this position is going to be an Anastasia checkmate. Now, this position might seldomly happen in your game, but it usually happens, and sometimes it's very, very important because a lot of players miss it. And we're going to be looking at positions or puzzles that have happened in real games by some players online on leeches, right? After the video, I'm going to also show you how to get the puzzle so that you can practice and make sure that you fully understand what it means before moving on to the next one. Now, you already know what you need to do and how your pieces are supposed to be positioned. You have a knight here. If your knight is over here and your rook is over here, right, you want to try and get your knight here so you can do the checkmate. So whenever you see that there's no knight on either this square, it can be opposite sides for black, maybe this square, right? For when you're trying to do checkmate for black as white, maybe you want to make sure knight is on this square, controlling these two squares. Yeah, hope you understand what I mean. So let's look at some practical positions. In this position, we've already looked at it, and we already saw that the knight is already here and here. All we need to do is to get rid of this pawn. If this one was not here, it would have been a checkmate, but it's here and we don't want that. So how can we do the checkmate? If you look at the position, you're going to see that the simple checkmate is going to be doing a queen sack. And if the queen takes the pawn, the rook goes to h5, and this is going to be a checkmate, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Now let's look at another position. Remember, the first thing that you want to do is to make sure the knight is in place. Is the knight in place? The answer is yes. The knight is in the right place we want it to be, controlling these two squares, g8 and g6 respectively. And remember, I showed you if it's white, this is how it's going to be. If it's black, the knight is going to be here. Now, how can we do a checkmate? All you need to do is to look for a checkmate. Don't say knight to g6. That's going to be bad. And I'm probably going to... Yeah, I'm not going to do anything, but what is going to be the checkmate? I'm guessing you've already seen it. So it's going to be a queen sack and then rook to h4. This is going to be a checkmate. Now let's look at another puzzle. In this position, you can see that the knight is in the position we want the knight to be. All we need to do is to get rid of this pawn and do a checkmate. Now, already you know that moving this knight is just going to be a bad move. What are you going to do when you now know that your knight is in position? Start looking for all the possible checks. You can spot that the rook is here, so we need to get both of these 2 pawns out. We really need to get both of these 2 pawns out. Well, put that in mind. Now look for all the possible checks that can happen. In this position, there are like there are 2 checks that can happen. Only 2 checks. Go in here and go in here. Now, if we go here, first of all, we're getting rid of this pawn that we need to stop the king from moving towards this side if we want to do a checkmate. Now, what of the other check? The other check going here. If we go here, okay, the king cannot actually move anywhere because the knight has got him trapped alongside his rook that is staying at his bottom. I don't know why. So the king is actually trapped, and the only square that the king has is, the only option that the king has is just to use one of his pawns to take on g5. The knight we're going to place on g5, and if the knight takes, we've gotten rid of this pawn. We now need to get rid of this pawn, but wait, we could just take. And if we take now, this rook is opened to the king, and that is our move. Knight goes here, and then we sack the knight. Oh, he's trying to block. In this position, don't make a mistake. Whatever you do, don't make a mistake and take with the pawn, because you're not blocking up the rook. So we're going to take with the rook instead. All right, now let's do 3 more puzzles, and then we're going to now look at the Arabian mate. In this position, you can see that the knight is not where we want. Where did we say we want the knight to be? On e7, exactly. So we're going to get the knight on e7, and if we get the knight to e7, what do you think is happening? We're now controlling the g8 and the g6 that we already looked at. And make sure, and one of the major ways you're going to know that your move is correct is that it comes with a check. You can see it comes with a check. So if this was not a check, I probably would have doubted the move, because right now, looking at this queen in our position is probably something to worry about, right? But we're going to go check, and now the queen is right. We now again have the same position that we had. How can you get rid of this pawn? There's only one way: sacrificing the rook. And we sacrifice the rook in Levy's voice. And what are we going to play now? We're going to go queen to h3, and that is going to be a checkmate. Okay, now 2 more positions. Is the knight in place? Yes, the knight is in place. Is there a pawn blocking? Yes, there's a pawn blocking. How can we get rid of the pawn? By sacrificing the rook. And now we sacrifice another rook, and all we need to do is just go rook check. And now the queen tries to block, but desperate to save the game, but nothing can happen. Same thing in this position. What are we going to play? We need to do a check. The knight is not where we want it to be. And after going here, we're now looking at this and this and this, and you can see this is the only way to get rid of this one. And can you see a check? Yes, this is a check, and this is the Anastasia's checkmate. Now we're going to do the last position. Is the knight in place? Yes. Can we get rid of this one? Yes. How? By doing a check with the rook. And next, we're just going to go queen to h5, and this is the Anastasia's checkmate. All right. How about the Arabian mate? Now, the Arabian mate is a little bit different from the Anastasia's checkmate. You know why? Because we don't usually end up using the queen in the final position. It's always going to be the knight and the rook. It's always going to be the knight and the rook. Now, let's try and look at the Arabian mate. Another Arabian mate. Arabian mate. Okay, looking for the Arabian mate. Arabian mate. Okay, so that was not me saying it. Arabian mate. Now, we're going to be looking at Arabian mate. And in this position, okay, this is not the starting position I want you to start with. Okay, now we're going to be doing the Arabian mate, and let's look at what you should be looking out for. And when you're doing the Arabian mate, this is the kind of position that you're going to always have. In this position, let's just take this rook out. Just look for dream square for your rook as black. You want to be black. Okay, let me place the king so that's not going to look weird. Yeah, there's a king on the board. Now, let's assume you have a rook and you're given an option to place the rook on any square. On any square. What square is that going to be? If your answer was on g1, then you're absolutely correct. If your answer was also on h2, you're absolutely correct. Because if the knight happens to be on g1, then this is going to be a checkmate. If your knight also happens to be on h2, boom. This is also a checkmate because the king cannot go anywhere, and yeah, this can happen. Now, do you understand the major difference between the Anastasias and Arabian? Let me show you. Let's place the rook back. And now, the major difference is the positioning of the knight and also the pawns. Well, majorly the knight. In the Anastasia's mate, we need the knight to stop the king from moving out this way. While in the Arabian mate, we need the knight to be over here, blocking the king from moving here and also supporting the rook. That is also going to be doing a checkmate. And that is the major difference between the Arabian and Anastasia's mate. The knight is always going to be diagonal to the king in the Arabian, while you want the knight to be on a straight line with the king, with a pawn beside the king stopping him from moving this way in the Anastasia's mate. Now let's move on to the Arabian mate. Arabian mate. Okay, in this position, remember, first thing you want to look at is where do you want your knights to be? You're just looking at the pieces on the board. Let's assume you don't even know what a checkmate, what an Arabian checkmate is. Okay, you already know. So what are you going to play in this position the first thing you want to look at is, where is my knight supposed to be? Remember, we're doing the Arabian checkmate, so we always know that the knight is diagonal to the king. But the question is that if we go here, isn't the pawn just going to take us? But no, the pawn cannot take, because there's actually a bishop doing a discovered attack on the king. And now if you go knight to f6, it's not only a check by the knight, but it's a double check by the king. Sorry, it's a double check by the bishop. Yeah, it's a double check by the bishop and the knight. So knight here looks good. Remember, I said one of the ways you want to know if your move is correct is that it comes with a check, right? Yeah, most times it's going to come with a check. Okay, so if we go knight here, now the knight is diagonal to the king. All we need to do, remember, what is the dream position of the rook now in the Arabian? Remember, it's either this or this, but there's no way to get any rook here. Even if we got any rook there, the queen can take this. The rook is all the family of the straight liner, so I'm just waiting to grab whatever piece is going to be here. Now, instead of thinking about this, we're going to now look at this, and there's a rook over here, and this is the Arabian checkmate. In this position, it's the same thing. Firstly, you want to look for where the knight, you want the knight to be. You want the knight to be always this way, pushing the king to the edge of the board. And now let's look at this position. If we go here, can't he just take? He can actually take. Yeah, he can actually take. But the question is, now, what happens after this and he takes? It's probably going to get checkmated one way or the other, I think. Now, if knight goes to f6, the pawn takes, and we don't have our Arabian checkmate, so that's just going to be a bad move. Now, this is the point where you think outside the box. You know that you know that you want your knights to be here so bad. Then this pawn is a major obstacle. Now, how can you get rid of the pawn with a tempo? The tempo meaning check, or yeah, for now let's just call it check. Now, how can you get rid of the pawn with a check? Not with the knight though, because you need the knight and the rook for your checkmates. And I said another difference between the Anastasia mate and the Arabian mate is that in the Arabian mate, you don't necessarily need your queen to do the checkmate. So whenever there's a queen, probably it involves sacking the queen. So in this position, one of the moves that you should look at that gets rid of this pawn is going here. You cannot go here because you're not getting rid of this pawn in the first place, and also the knight can just take you. So this check is not valid. We're going to go queen takes pawn, and in this position, okay, definitely king cannot take, and the king cannot move anywhere, so he's forced to take. If he takes back, now you've gotten rid of this pawn, and there's a rook over here, so you can simply take this way, and you're gonna see what is going to happen. Takes, knight takes pawn, and now this pawn is free. And remember, we just want to do a check, and the only way he will have stopped this check is by blocking with the rook. And now that he has blocked with the rook, our rook simply takes on h7, and this is going to be a checkmate, the Arabian checkmate. Now let's look at this position. Remember, where do you want the knight to be? You want the knight to be diagonal to the king, and you want the king to be on this square, something like this, right? So going here already tells you that this is the first move. The question is, when you go here, where can the king go? The king cannot stay on this line because there's a rook. The king cannot move here also because the knight is going to be attacking this square also. So forcing the king to move back to this holy square, and then now the knight over here is protecting this square that you're going to eventually take your rook. Okay, this position, same thing. Where do you want the knight to be? Knight should be on f6. So let's take the pawn on f6. No, if you take an f6, it's just going to be very, very bad. I'm so sorry, but this is not going to be the move. What is going to be the move then? Remember, I gave you a hint. I said whenever you see a queen in the position of the Arabian mates, most of the times you're just going to end up sacrificing the queen because it's important. Now, in this position, what are you going to place? Right? We're going to take a pawn. Nope. Are we? Oh, look at, yeah, because this is the only check, isn't it? This is the only check. You cannot do a check with the bishop. There's a bishop over there. So this is the only check, and it's a move that buys us time and gives us, it's a forcing move. So if we take the pawn, the question is what is going to happen? The king has to take. And if he takes, now we can take this bishop with a check. Can you see? Queen takes pawn, and we take with a check, attacking the rook. And our rook is also attacking. So even though we are down a whole queen in this position, we're going to still win the game. And boom, this is going to be a checkmate. Now in this position, what do you want to do? Same thing. You know that if you go here, the pawn this pawn is going to just take the knight. So you would really want to get rid of this pawn. And if you look at all the possible checks that can get rid of this pawn, you're going to see that it's only one. And look at your queen. Remember, it's still using the left to right scanning technique to find all the possible checks. Look at your queen over here. And now, what are you going to play? Queen takes pawn on h6 is a check. The king cannot move anywhere, cannot capture because there's a knight protecting, so he has to capture this way. And this gets rid of the pawn for this to happen. Okay, now let's go. Boom, and boom. And what are you seeing now? We can take the rook, and even if the other rook takes, we take back this way. And this is going to be, once again, another checkmate. All right. Now, here's a look at another position. Ooh, we already have our knight and king in position. All we need to do is to get the rook either this square or this square, but it looks like it's going to be much more possible to get the rook to this square, but there's a pawn over. What can we do to get rid of this pawn? I'm very sure you've already gotten the answer. And the answer is going to be queen sack on h5, because this gets rid of this pawn, and boom, checkmate with the rook. In this position, you're going to do the same thing. Remember, don't be too quick to say, oh, I want to go check over here. The knight has to be diagonal to the king. So we're going to go knight to f6, because once again, this is a double check from the bishop. You can see the bishop is lined up with the king, and going here places the king on a double check. Whenever the king is on the double check, the king has to move away. And now that the king has moved away, all we need to do is just play rook takes pawn, and this is a checkmate. And I think we've solved some bunch of puzzles on this. So if you want to try and solve the puzzles on Lichess, on this mating patterns, all you need to do is to go to Lichess puzzles, right? Lichess puzzle themes, and if you scroll up, you're going to see mating themes, and then you click on the Arabian and Anastasia's mates, and you need to solve, same again, at least 50 of these puzzles. Solve at least 50 of these puzzles, and once you can solve at least 50 of the puzzles and then solve any other puzzle after that conveniently, it means that you've mastered it and you're ready to move on to the next ones. The next ones are going to be the Boden's mate and the Balestra mate, or the Blancpain mate, any of the three. So let's see. Make sure you look at make sure you try to solve all the puzzles on make sure you try to solve at least 50 puzzles on this before moving on to the next one, which is going to be the Boden's mate. All right.